computer farther and farther away every week so I can see it. All right, we are in Proverbs 11, and once again there's a variety of different topics, as some of Proverbs chapters do, kind of deal with a variety of different issues, but we're going to focus primarily tonight on one. But I'm going to read through the whole chapter and then kind of pull out some of the verses and talk about, like I said, primarily one. In our discussion time, there'll be a couple others that may come up. So Proverbs chapter 11. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless make their paths straight, but the wicked are brought down by their own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the unfaithful are trapped by evil desires. Hope placed in mortals die with them. All the promise of their power comes to nothing. The righteous person is rescued from trouble, and it falls on the wicked instead. With their mouths, the godless destroy their neighbors, but through knowledge the righteous escape. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Through the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked it is destroyed. Whoever derides their neighbor has no sense, but the one who has understanding holds their tongue. A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. For lack of guidance a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisers. Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands and pledge is safe. A kind-hearted woman gains honor, but ruthless men gain only wealth. Those who are kind benefit themselves, but the cruel bring ruin on themselves. A wicked person earns deceptive wages, but the one who sows righteousness reaps a sure reward. Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death. The Lord detests those whose hearts are perverse, but he delights in those whose ways are blameless. Be sure of this, the wicked will not go unpunished, but those who are righteous will go free. Like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. That's the only one I have a comment after in this particular one, and I just put, okay. We may discuss that one. The desire of the righteous ends only in good, but the hope of the wicked only in wrath. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. People curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. Whoever seeks good finds favor, but evil comes to those who searches for it. Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf. Whoever brings ruin on their family will inherit only wind, and the fool will be servant to the wise. The fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and the one who is wise saves lives. If the righteous receive their due on earth, how much more the ungodly and the sinner? So, several different topics that we could bring up there, but one that pops up throughout the chapter is the idea of handling wealth and prosperity. And so the question is, how do we properly handle wealth and prosperity? And there's some different verses in here I think kind of point to that. And I give you a few ideas of how do we make sure we are wise with handling wealth and prosperity. So one of the things that I say sometimes nowadays is people talk about stuff they're going through, and I don't mean this negatively, but I do mean it honestly, is they'll talk about something they'll go through, and even myself, I think to myself with this is like, I have first world problems. I don't worry about where my meal is coming from. I don't worry about whether my family is going to be fed or whether we're safe. There's a lot of things that we don't have to worry about that other people in the world have to worry about. And if you are in a mid-level income in America, you are in the top 5% of the world as far as income. And so we do have a lot of wealth and prosperity around us, and we are part of wealth and prosperity. We sometimes nowadays you can go by a subdivision and look at the houses, and 300 years ago those houses would be considered castles. And now they're just regular homes that they build a whole lot of in a subdivision. So we have a tremendous amount of wealth and prosperity. So how do we handle it? The first one that this particular chapter talks about is being blameless. And the way it does that is a couple different verses, and one of them is right in verse 1. It talks about the idea of dishonest scales. And that's an interesting comment because we really don't use scales anymore. And so dishonest scales in the ancient Near East, and probably still today in certain parts of the world, were basically made to cheat people. This is 1 pound. Well, it's really 15 ounces, and so it's a dishonest scale. So how do we transfer that to today, of the idea of being blameless and not being people of dishonest scales? Here's a few things. In business, dishonest scales would be the idea of burying something in the fine print of a contract. Basically making something balance out more in your favor without letting the person know, in a contract or something like that. One that ticks us all off, hidden fees. The idea of placing hidden fees in things is basically a dishonest scale situation. Not keeping your word in business dealings. Taking money for work you don't intend to accomplish. Every once in a while you hear about somebody, I gave somebody up front $4,000 to redo my kitchen, and all of a sudden they're gone, and they have no contact with them whatsoever. That's basically a dishonest scales in the business arrangement. So anything which tips the scales in your favor financially. Now, when you're in business, obviously you're in business to make money, not to lose money. So there are certain things that you do that help tip things in your favor. The issue is not doing it in a dishonest way. So that's one of them. Handling wealth and prosperity. How do we do it? Being blameless and righteous. Verse 28 talks about being not only blameless but righteous as well in handling wealth and prosperity. The second one is being generous. Verse 25, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. And then verse 26, as it goes on, it says something interesting also. It says, people curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. And once again, we have something that doesn't directly apply to us because most of us don't have fields of grain to worry about today. So what's the principle there? And the principle there basically is an unwillingness to share when bounty comes our way. And it's the idea of God has blessed us in some way, shape, or form. We see a need, we have an opportunity to bless somebody else, and we hoard our grain instead of giving liberally and giving generously, and saying, I've been blessed by God, I can now give. We hoard our grain. That reminded me of also the tithe in the Old Testament, because when you look at what the reason for the tithe was originally, it was focused on supporting the Levitical priesthood. So the idea of the tithe going to the church is very reminiscent of, in the Old Testament, the tithe going to the temple. And it was the support of the Levitical priesthood and making sure they were clothed and fed and their family was taken care of, in the same way we may pay a pastor nowadays. But it wasn't only, the tithe wasn't only for that. So the tithe in the Old Testament also was caring for widows, orphans, and the foreigner. And so the question becomes is, why are these particular people singled out as in need of the tithe? And the issue is when you take a look at the Old Testament in the ancient Near East, in that culture, they were the three groups of people that were most likely to be not cared for or abused. And so, and I'll give you one example today with the widow, is we know of different people who have, as they've gotten older, they get these calls and they say, if you don't send me, I'm your grandson, what have you, if you don't send me your money. I mean, older people tend to be abused if they don't have somebody looking out for them. And so in the case of the older person, the tithe was for the widow who did not have children, who had no way to support herself any longer. She lost everything. And a good example of that, actually, in both the widow and the foreigner, is actually Naomi and Ruth. If you take a look in the book of Ruth and you read through that story, is what was the issue? Destitute. Naomi lost her husband, lost her sons. They were the ones that were adult sons that would have taken care of her. She's destitute. Ruth ends up, when they come to Bethlehem, Ruth ends up gleaning in the field, as people of poverty did, as the only way they could feed themselves. And so the Old Testament tithe was set up for the widow. It was also set up for the orphan. And again, the issue is no family to care for them whatsoever. And so the tithe that went to the temple was to take care of the orphan because they were defenseless. The third one is the foreigner. And it's an interesting one because you say, well, okay, so why would the foreigner fall into that category? So Naomi and Ruth also fall into that category of their this opportunity they have to be able to be cared for because they come away from the place where they lived into a foreigner situation. And so what's the situation there? And I would say a couple things about the culturally, and we have to take the principle and say, how does this apply? The foreigner would usually not leave their tribe. That was very much unheard of in that day and age. Why? Because the tribe was the family, the tribe was safety, the tribe was your nationhood, your culture, the tribe was everything. So why would a person leave their tribe? So it was usually famine or disease related, where the tribe is struck with a famine and you end up with people who are destitute and have to join another tribe. It's not an option for them. If they don't join another tribe, they're going to die. So famine or disease related, outcast related. A person within the tribe, for whatever reason, was thrown out of the tribe, and they were basically homeless and penniless. So when they came to a new tribe, they came in, a situ of destitution. The other one was war related. And if you take a look at Joshua, Rahab was an example of that. So Rahab was in Jericho, and she recognized that this was the one true God, and the Israelites were coming. The walls of Jericho fall, and what happens with Rahab? Rahab is taken in as a foreigner into a new tribe. So when we take a look at giving generously, one of the things we have to really honestly say is, do these people fall into the category that they are either in destitution or moving toward destitution? And those are the ones that, in biblical principle, deserve help first. That doesn't mean nobody else deserves help. But the issue is if you see somebody in destitution for the reasons that they have not been able to help, in the Old Testament, it's famine, it's disease, it's outcast, it's war. So basically the tithe in the Old Testament was used for people who were in destitute situations. So being blameless, being generous, what else do we do? How else do we handle our wealth? Well, here's an interesting one. being wise enough to say no. So verse 15 says this, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands in pledge is safe. And we'll talk about this more in discussion time, but think about that in relationship. It's actually telling you to withhold an ask. Somebody is asking you something, and it's telling you to say no. And we'll talk about that one during discussion time. I'll hold off on that because that's an interesting one, and we'll kind of unpack what that means. And then, of course, verse 28 talks about the idea of not trusting in riches for our welfare. And that falls very much into the category of Jesus' teaching on our daily bread, is recognizing that it's not our wealth that is our Savior. God's the one who provides for us. Any wealth that we have is because he has provided it, and in a moment's notice it could be taken away. And so we don't trust in riches for our welfare. We trust in our daily bread that comes from the Lord. So that's really focusing mainly on some of the verses that talk about how we handle wealth and prosperity. Let's take a break, and then we'll discuss that and maybe a couple other topics.
We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
So let's start off with this idea of verse 15 that we said we'd discuss, is whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands and pledge is safe. So what's the principle that Solomon is trying to teach here? Because he's basically just said, be generous, if you're going to be righteous, you're going to, take care of the needy. But then he also throws this verse in that basically says, be ready to say no. And so what's happening in this situation that Solomon would say, be ready to say no for somebody who asks for your help?
When they're asking you instead of you being aware of their situation.
Okay.
And kind of seems like he's saying, if they're going to ask you, then don't give it to them. But if you notice that they're in need, then go ahead.
So that's a part of it. I don't know if it's completely that. There's a key word in this verse that you have to really kind of grab a hold of. Other thoughts about this?
Well, I think of somebody asking you to co-sign a note for them, and the question is, why are they having to borrow the money and need somebody to co-sign for them? Why are they in a situation where they can't handle it themselves?
So let me follow this up, would you say that we're never supposed to co-sign for someone?
I would say you have to look at it very carefully.
Okay. So you wouldn't say never.
Right.
So what's the key word in the verse? Because there's situations where you might say, I would co-sign.
Stranger.
That's what the key word is. It's the issue of a stranger. And basically, you do not know why they're bringing this to you because you don't know them well enough. So the issue is not necessarily that you shouldn't do it in any way, shape, or form, that you shouldn't help somebody in this particular way. The parent who co-signs for their child and has a level of trust in them. Now, it doesn't mean that the child couldn't walk away and decide not going to pay, that sort of thing. It happens. But the idea is, if there's a relationship, then I think Solomon would say, I'm not saying don't do this if there's a relationship. He is saying don't do this if there's not a relationship.
Well, I can relate to where there was a relationship. We were asked to co-sign a note, and it was for a relative, and we knew what had happened. They were gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So did you agree?
No, Marge went crazy.
So sometimes you know the person and you know it's better not to co-sign the note. But if you don't know them, then Solomon's basically saying I think the overall principle here is, and I'm going to make a statement I'm going to give you an example of something that to me follows up well on this one. But I think the principle here is, you don't give to somebody if you don't know what their circumstance is and you don't have a relationship with them. And now that comes down pretty hard, because what it says is, okay, the person who stands by the side of the road need help, or the panhandler that comes up to you in the city who wants money. The suggestion here is you don't help a person if you don't know them. As far as financially, now I wouldn't say if somebody is hungry that you wouldn't go and buy them a meal. That's a different thing. That's not co-signing for them. So there is a way to help the needy person without putting yourself in a financial binding situation with them.
Yeah, I think it's much more prevalent among people who know each other that the things go south. They get taken advantage of by someone they know, because people who don't know you aren't going to come up and go, hey, can you co-sign for a car? Can you, usually it's, hey, can you buy me lunch? And then you have to use your discernment to go, okay, is this guy really need lunch, or is he going to go buy a bottle of liquor?
Right.
So, but, in reality, I don't think any homeless person is going to come up and go, hey, can you sign for my car?
Right. And so let me ask the question then, is the principle more broad than just a co-signing situation?
Yeah, but I think when people lose big money, it's somebody they know. If you're going to give a homeless person $100 because you feel like they really need it, you may end up giving that in error. And but you're not asking for money back either. Right.
Well, you're definitely more likely to be in a situation to help somebody financially because you know them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unusual, especially nowadays, because in a Judeo-Christian culture, I think people are more leery of saying, I don't know the person, I'm not going to be able to help them in that way. I mean, but in other cultures that may be like, well, gosh, you're supposed to help them. Mm-hmm. And I give you an example that I wonder if it covers the principle that's here, because when you take a look at something like, so we'll go back to the hoarding grain situation. The principle behind hoarding grain, because we don't grow grain, is unwillingness to share when bounty comes your way. That's the principle. And so we can apply that to ourselves even though we don't grow grain. So the question becomes is, when he says this, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands and pledge is safe. Is it broader than just co-signing for a loan? That's my question. And I'll give you an example that we would use potentially to talk about this. When I lived near a city, I had a friend of mine who started working for basically an inner city mission kind of situation. And one of the things that they would do is they would get a lot of food from one of the organizations that provides food, goes around and picks it up from all the stores and whatnot. And they would bring it to a parking lot in the middle of the city, and they just, it was on pallets. They just line it up, and the cars would pull up, and they would just fill the cars with food. And I was helping with this, first time I'd ever been helping with it, and I saw a guy pull up, and he loaded his entire minivan. Didn't have any seats in the back of his minivan. He loaded his entire minivan with food. He left. He's gone for an hour. He came back with an empty minivan, and he loaded the entire minivan up again. And I've been around the block enough where I said to my friend, I said, I think he's going down the road and probably selling this at a flea market, these city pop-up flea markets. And is this really the best way to utilize resources? Because in my mind, who needs it? It's the widow, it's the orphan, it's the destitute, it's the people that really, and he was fine. It seemed like he was physically fine. And I don't know the whole story, but I worried about that. And my friend's reply was, oh, it doesn't matter, we're just supposed to give it to them. And that really concerned me, because it was like, that to me is the principle of, you're basically helping a stranger that you have no idea what their background is. I've seen other organizations, hey, here's a simple form to fill out, your name, what are your needs, and if they show up 6 or 7 times, after a while, it's like, are they really needy, or are they just sucking off of the organization? And I hate that, because we want to be graceful. But the truth of the matter is Scripture tends to teach, well, Paul says, you don't work, you don't eat. I mean, that's a Bible verse, The idea of the person has to put into the situation what is their responsibility in order for somebody else, a church, a help organization, in order to minister to them. And I was really surprised that this particular person just said, oh, we're not supposed to, we just give it to them. And I thought, this is really, my opinion was, this is not how you give. And some of these, yeah, and that's the thing, is there's different verses in Scripture that talk about how you stored your resources, whether that's your own money or the money of the church or the money of a Christian organization. And I'm not saying it's easy, because it's hard, because you have to sit there and try to make judgment calls about different situations, about different people. Will you make mistakes? Absolutely. And my opinion is, if you make a mistake on the grace side, God appreciates the fact that you are trying to be as graceful as possible, even if you gave to somebody who in one way, shape, or form didn't deserve it. What are your thoughts about that?
We used to have the toy program, I think they still do in the city, for the fire department, and we would collect toys, have 100 families sign up, and some of the guys, when it was the day to pick up the toys, they'd pull up and they'd have a nicer car than what we were driving. So, and they were getting mad about that. And I said, there's 104 people coming to pick up toys today. If 90 of them are needy and honest about it, and 14 are selling the toys for a profit, or taking them back to Myers, or whatever they're doing, I go, we're not going to take our time to find out or follow them to find out what they're doing. We're going to rely on, people's good nature, and not judge people, and just, and some people agreed, and some said, well, I think they're taking advantage of it. Well, so be it.
Yeah.
That was my attitude.
They did start a thing where they had to sign up at a central thing.
People were signing up for
So they
4 or
can
5 different
collect from one place.
different organizations. Like they'd sign up for Toys for Tots in our fire department, and whoever else.
Okay.
Now they have
So the accountability increased as right.
But still, there, it's like there's always going to be a percentage of people who are going to take advantage of the situation.
And the issue, yeah, and that's when I say is there's a certain level. You can't go to the ends of the earth on accountability. Is kind of what you're suggesting, and I would agree. You can do what your due diligence within the time that you have, because otherwise you got your firefighters are spending all time chasing people around trying to figure out who deserves toys and who doesn't. And you're not fighting fires.
Yeah, and that's not up to us.
Yeah.
It's not up to us to decide that.
So,
I didn't think.
well, and so to me, it's up to any organization to try to find a level of accountability.
Yeah.
But then at the same time you can't go to the ends of the earth but when one of the churches I pastored, we worked with an organization in town, and they were basically a clearinghouse for people who were in need. And so they kept track of, a lot of the churches, I don't know if all of them did, but a lot of churches would funnel people to this organization. The organization kept track of all the people who had needs. And if somebody popped up 8 times, they knew it because it was one organization. So if they were contacting 8 different churches, after a while, this organization knew what they were doing. And then we would say, listen, we will give to this person's need if you give us the thumbs up that this person hasn't come 6, 8, 12 times, on a regular basis, versus they actually have a need here. So yeah, the issue is we have to be generous. We also have to have wisdom to know basically when to say no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like in your situation, to confirm one way or the other, you would have had to follow that person. Maybe he was going to the Goodwill Inn and dropping off all the food there, and getting another load and dropping off, or maybe he was selling it, like
right.
you said. But
yeah,
you don't know. And personally, I'm not going to make that judgment unless I physically see them do one or the other.
The thing that bothered me the most actually was the response. We don't have to do that.
Right.
Because I do think there could have been more accountability in place. And so, yeah, I mean, because I didn't judge that person. I just thought, that's weird. Exactly. And what do you think about that? Because he was the director of the organization. And what I got back was there was no responsibility to be accountable at all. And I thought, well, that's probably not the best. Other thoughts about that?
Well, just the whole reason they're doing it is to get food into the hands of the needy.
Right.
And when they don't care, then there's probably a lot of needy people that aren't getting food because someone's, who knows, but say he's taking it and selling it for money. All that food could have went to the needy.
Yeah.
Instead, it's.
Yeah. And in any case, whether it's something like that, whether it's the toy program, whether it's seeing somebody in the city who is panhandling or something like that, is how do you build a system that's basically both grace and truth. It's both being as graceful as possible, giving liberally, giving generously, which is what Scripture teaches us, but also the idea is being wise as serpents is one of the phrases that I think of that Jesus talks about, is that there's a wisdom that comes with, like you said, being a steward, recognizing that it's not, it's God's money, and He wants us to give it wisely.
Yeah, that Feed the Kids program over there at J&S.
Yeah.
So she has put out several notices about people taking food, and on Facebook, please take what you need. So there's stuff for others just as a reminder. So, and sometimes they'll even just put out a certain amount and not fill it completely. But that's a hard situation because people are just driving up, and I've seen people drive up in a van. When I'm going to breakfast there, I'll walk out and somebody's loading their van up, just like you said. Maybe it's the same guy.
This was years ago. I'm probably not the same guy. Well, we had a situation at one of the churches I was at was doing a weekly meal for people of need here in Traverse City, and there's a number of churches that have done that and are doing that. And afterwards, we get a lot of food. Food rescue would come and say, we just got a boatload of food, because we're a tourist town and there's a lot of food that flows through, especially in the summertime. And so they'd just give us a boatload of food. So oftentimes after we were done feeding, we would allow people to take, because we'd have leftover bread and leftover fruit and vegetables and everything. And we had one lady we had to start talking to because she was hoarding food. But she was a hoarder in general. And so we had to finally say, there's a certain amount you can take and no more, because she other people were getting upset with her because there was nothing left after she would go through.
I don't like that when I go to a buffet.
And people have,
Get
and
the-
I,
they don't have my
and I
chicken.
was in front of you, right? I was in front of you, took all the bacon.
Exactly.
I'd only do it if it was bacon. All right, so that's Proverbs chapter 11, and we will see you next week as we dive into Proverbs chapter 12. I want to say hi to Mike Wilson and Judy Tompkins. They're watching tonight, we understand. So thanks so much for watching. Have a great, great evening.